the full slide, right? Not the
it looks good.
presenter. Yeah, great. Okay. Never quite tell what Zoom's going to do. Well, thank you so much for inviting me to this. It's a bit nerve-wracking to kick it off. I have a lot of pressure to stay on time here, probably more so than anybody else. So I was asked to present on our project Firebird, and I'll get into that in a second. As Roy said, I'm with Audubon Delta, which is probably a name that isn't too familiar with most people yet. It's a newly formed regional office that included 3 former state offices of the National Audubon Society. So that includes Louisiana, Mississippi, and Arkansas. And we have joined forces to create a regional structure to help facilitate conservation opportunities across the lower Mississippi River region. So my background is I've been with National Audubon for about 10 years. And so it's a transition for me to be in this new regional office, but there's a lot of exciting opportunities, one of which is this project Firebird that I'll be talking about. So the goal of this project is to manage high marshes to benefit black rails, yellow rails, and mottled ducks. 3 pretty enigmatic species that we don't know a whole lot about. And I'll start off with the black rail, right? So this is a bird that has recently, it's the most recent bird addition to the Endangered Species Act. It was listed in the fall of 2020, and the current population estimate, at least within the United States, is fewer than 3,000 birds. So to put that in perspective, when the piping plover was listed, the population estimates were around 4,000 birds. Most of the distribution is actually in Texas. Most of the population is in Texas. And one of the reasons it's been listed is because it has been exhibiting really high population declines in parts of its range where it's been well studied. For example, through the SHARP program in the Mid-Atlantic, they've seen almost a 90% decline over the last 30 years of this species through standardized surveys. So pretty alarming. The biggest threat appears to be sea level rise. So it's probably the first bird to be listed, specifically with climate change being the primary contributing factor to its population decline. Along the Gulf Coast, this is where most of the population exists. Again, that is within Texas. You can see in this map that Louisiana doesn't even show up. It's not until very recently that we figured out that black rails were permanent year-round residents in Louisiana. And so that work was funded actually pretty recently. It started in 2017. It was funded through the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries, awarded a contract to the Audubon Society to do some initial surveys to try to figure out the baseline of the black rail population in Louisiana. Prior to 2017, there was no known breeding population, no known wintering population, just a few scattered records. But we found birds, and we found them year-round in certain reliable places, and we were able to, through an occupancy modeling framework, identify habitat factors that best predicted the occupancy of black rails at point counts around Southwest Louisiana. And this graph basically shows the strongest relationship is with increasing cover of what's called Gulf cordgrass or Spartina spartani. So once you get to above, 40, 50% cover of Spartina spartani, there was a very high probability that black rails were present. This is a grass that doesn't like to get its roots wet, but will tolerate storm surge inundation. And so it's what we call a characteristic species of high marsh. And I'll get more into that in a second. Meanwhile, in Texas, folks out of Clay Green's lab had been doing some excellent work in the prior years to 2017. James Tolliver published his master's thesis that showed a very similar relationship between black rail occupancy and Gulf cordgrass, or that Spartina spartani. So we have now a sense of where black rails are most likely to be found. The next question is how to manage for this habitat and keep it healthy. So that's really what the next step is. Over the next several years, I'm part of a team that's been funded through the Restore Science program to study fire management relationships with high marsh habitat and how species like black rails, yellow rails, and mottle duck respond to that fire management. It's a 5-year grant that began in 2019, but through various issues, notwithstanding COVID, and actually the Endangered Species Act listing, which created permit challenges, we're finally ready to kick this off. And so it's a Gulf-wide collaborative approach. It's being led through the Illinois Natural Survey History Museum and Mississippi State University. So Drs. Ariel Fournier and Dr. Mark Woodry are the PIs of the project. There's 19 co-PIs across the Gulf from universities, state and federal agencies, and non-governmental organizations, one of which is Audubon and the other is Ducks Unlimited. And you can see all the different, the different partners' logos here in the graphic. So I mentioned high marsh before. It's a fairly poorly understood and poorly defined habitat type. It's thought to be this area sort of in between where the daily tidal fluctuations inundates the marsh and the more upland habitats that starts to get into woody vegetation like Baccharis or Iva or even coastal chimeras. And so it's really a transition zone between low wet marsh and high upland habitat. There are, the vegetation components are things like Spartinus spartani, like I mentioned before. There are patents that are sometimes co-dominant in this habitat. And then sometimes there are salt pans and those kinds of features that are dominated by disticulus and various succulents that are also sort of intermixed within high marsh habitat. And all of that seems to be very preferred habitat for black rail, yellow rail, and mottle duck. So the project objectives for our Firebird project are to identify prescribed fire practices that support those 3 focal species through an adaptive resource management process. So we're working very closely with land managers that apply fire into high marsh habitats along the coast. And we're determining mechanisms of bird response to those fire applications through understanding the plant community and the invertebrate community. We're also determining if weather patterns affect prescribed fire and if those weather patterns are changing over time. So part of the team is actually climatologists that are looking at weather patterns and how fire managers take advantage of those different weather conditions. We're also measuring the distribution and abundance of these 3 species in high marsh across the Gulf states during the breeding and non-breeding seasons. And that's one of my primary roles in this project, is to understand the abundance of these species in Louisiana, and we'll be working with partners. I'll be working with partners in Eastern Texas as well. And I've already had some really exciting conversations with folks at Houston Audubon to talk about how we might work together on this project too. So looking forward to that. We have team members that are mapping and validating high marsh habitat through remote sensing technologies. And through our work, we'll also be estimating the proportion of resident black rails that spend the entire year along the Gulf Coast and migratory populations that come from the very poorly known central US population. So a lot of, like I said, we're really ramping up this work starting this winter. There's actually volunteer opportunities if you are interested, or if you have friends that may be interested in coming help survey black rails. One of the ways we do these surveys is through what we call dragline surveys at night. So we take a bottle attached to a long rope, and with a handful of people walk through the marsh with high-powered lights and try to flush birds out of the marsh. We move very slowly so we don't accidentally hurt a bird, and have a better, it actually has a better probability of flushing up black rails and yellow rails when you move slowly. So it's challenging walking, but not completely exhausting in most circumstances. And we usually do this on weekends. I put my colleague's email on here if you might be interested in volunteering. Make sure you spell his name right. It's with an O-N, Jonathan. His last name is Luke, L-U-E-C-K. It's kind of a complicated name, so make sure you get it right. And here's a little video of a black rail that we captured through these surveys and released. And you can kind of get a sense of how they move through the marsh, much like a small mouse or small rat, and then just out of, just suddenly disappear, just completely out of view. Very exciting, very secretive birds to be working with. And I want to sort of end that climate change is not really the only threat to these birds.
Oh, we lost
sorry.
No
Yeah. I think my internet, I live out in the country. My internet didn't like me playing a video.
No worries.
It's also a 2-minute warning.
Yeah, go ahead and reshare and finish up. And yeah, I want to see the last couple slides.
Sure. All right, let's see here. That should work. Yeah, so I kind of wanted to end with the idea that climate change is not the only threat to black rails. Coastal development, particularly in South Louisiana and in East Texas, can be a major challenge. Liquefied natural gas is a big push right now in the United States. There's a proposed facility being planned on top of what we discovered to be one of the most important black rail areas in Southwest Louisiana. We've been fighting this tooth and nail. We're working with Sierra Club and other partners, other NGO partners to fight this. It's gotten some media attention, but this project still seems to be barreling forward. Right now, it is under FERC, which is the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, who is reviewing the project plans. U.S. Fish and Wildlife has reviewed a biological assessment, which is just made public this week. This is the docket number. If you go to FERC online and search with that docket number, you can see Audubon's objections to the project, as well as other materials related to the project. I would encourage you all to take a look at this. If you're interested in helping us push back, please feel free to reach out. I will put my email in the chat. And I believe that is the end of my presentation. So yes, it is. Thank you so much for your time and the opportunity.
Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. That was great. And again, you can put questions in the chat or stick around and we'll have time for discussion afterwards.
All right.
You guys see that?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so I'm Susan Heath. I'm the Director of Research at Gulf Coast Bird Observatory, and I'm going to talk to you about American oyster catchers. So in Texas, we have oyster catchers live American oyster catchers live all along the Atlantic coast and the Gulf Coast, and actually all the way down into South America. But in Texas, the bulk of them live in the upper and central coast. There's not very many of them down in the southern part of the state because the habitat changes down there. It's not quite right for them. Despite their name oyster catcher, they eat a lot of things besides oysters. There's a big long list there. They eat pretty much anything they can find in a marine environment. And there's a picture of one with a hermit crab that it dug out of a shell. So they don't actually pry open the oyster shells. They walk along and they search until they find an oyster that's open a little bit because it's siphoning water, and then they jab their bill in between the two shells and sever the abductor muscle, which is holding the shells together, and then they get the meat. So they're not actually prying them open. They're taking advantage of how the oysters operate. In Texas, oyster catchers nest on bay islands predominantly, and they just make their nest on the ground. There's a picture of one there. On the right, they scrape out a little bowl in the shell, and then they lay 1 to 3 eggs. 3 eggs is a full clutch for them, and both the male and the female incubate, and it takes about 28 days for the chicks to hatch. The chicks are precocial, which means they can walk around, and they're covered with down as soon as they hatch. So here's a cute picture of some chicks that just hatched. You can see the shells are still even there in the scrape, Usually the adults will take the shells away and fly away with them and drop them somewhere else so it's not obvious that there's young birds around for predators. And so why are we studying them? Well, they're a keystone species at the top of the marine food web, and they're a good indicator of the health of oyster reefs. If you have lots of oyster catchers on a reef, then you know that there's lots of food there. And oysters are an extremely important part of the marine system. So oyster catchers can serve as a surrogate species for many other species that use oyster reefs for habitat. So there's a lot of threats to them. Here's some of the predators. I put out game cams, and we got coyotes and possums and a feral cat. But laughing gulls are the primary predator for them. They will take the eggs and the young chicks. And the laughing gulls nest in the same environment as the oyster catchers, so they are around all the time. And then overwash, because they nest on these small islands, overwash is a big problem for them too. And there's a bird that's that arrow is pointing to a bird on a nest, and the tide is coming up, and that nest did not make it. So we're also seeing a lot of island erosion. The small islands where they nest are eroding away. This is an island. You can see the signs that we put there a few years prior, and now this island is no longer viable habitat for them. It has eroded to the point where they can't nest on it, and that's happening to a lot of the islands where they nest. So some more threats that they have is human disturbance. If humans, fishermen, and other people are out recreating on the bay in their boats and they get too close to the islands, will keep the adults off of a nest. And then the eggs could get too hot or too cold, because oyster catchers in Texas start nesting in January. So it can be quite cold. And so the eggs can get too hot if it's in the winter, or too cold if it's in the winter, too hot if it's in the summer. They also have a big problem with fishing line. There's a picture of a bird that we caught in West Galveston Bay. We were able to get that fishing line off, and that bird recovered amazingly. He's still out there, but a lot of them don't survive a fishing line entanglement like that. So we are monitoring nests so we can determine productivity data and what their threats are, the major predators, and the significance of human disturbance. So you can see those pictures on the right. The top one, the arrow is pointing to a little crack in the shell. It looks like a little smile on there maybe. That's a chick just starting to pip out of the egg. And then the bottom one shows just has chicks on the shell where they are. And so you can see how vulnerable they are because they're just on the open shell like that. So we're also putting color bands on birds so that we can track their movements. And these bands go above the leg joint, and they have a code on them so that we can look in binoculars and tell which bird is which without having to read the teeny tiny numbers on the metal band. And so this is helping us to determine their extent of their territorialness and to keep track of who's paired with who, determine whether they come back to the same nesting site each year, and to follow how the chicks move around, because they don't start breeding until they're at least 3. So for 3 years, the young birds are just kind of roaming around. So we've color banded 228 adults and 196 chicks over 11 years. I think I updated that for this year. And this is what the bands look like. So if you see an oyster catcher with bands like that, please report it to me. These birds are U6W and U9U. So that triangle pattern is you read the character on the top first and then the 2 on the bottom. We also have some of the older birds only have 2 characters, so it might be L9 or LE or something like that. So we always find our first nest in January, February, last nest in June, except this year we did find one in early July, but that's the first time that's ever happened. So the last chicks get fledged in July or August, and the percent nest fledging chicks between 8 and 62%. So you can see there's a huge range of what happens each year. that's mostly weather dependent. If we have a lot of bad weather, storms and stuff like that, then they're not going to do very well. And the productivity range from 14% to 78%. So also a big range there. Most of the pairs remain on their territory year round. The males will rarely switch territories, but the females will often switch mates if they're not happy with how their situation's going. So in the future, habitat is the biggest thing that we are working on, and we're working with a number of agencies to create new oyster catcher nesting habitat. And so the Galveston Bay Area Master Naturalist helped me a lot with my monitoring. We're working with the Galveston Bay Foundation on a project in Jones Bay to recreate 4 small islands. And Texas Parks and Wildlife and U.S. Fish and Wildlife are assisting with all those efforts. There's a group of master naturalists down by Port O'Connor that have a project to create some habitat down there. And I'm working in a number of other areas. And I just have to give a shout out to everyone who's helped me on this project. It's been for 11 years, I've had a lot of partners, several grad students, and of course we couldn't have done it with all of them. So I just always want to recognize them for their help. And then during the nesting season, I do a blog on the GCBO website once a week called the Oyster Catcher Diaries. And you can follow along with what happens in the nesting season if you just go to that blog and read up on that. And I think that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Up next, we have Dara from Audubon Delta.
Oops. Where do I have to go? Oh, what am I doing here? What? All right. You see my slideshow screen?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So thank you all for having me here. I am Dara. I'm the biologist for Audubon Delta's. Again, as Eric said, that this is a new sort of combined regional office between Mississippi, Louisiana, and Arkansas. And so I was the biologist of what formerly was known as Audubon Mississippi, the Coastal Bird Stewardship Program. So I'm going to talk to you today about the Audubon Coastal Bird Survey. This is a Gulf-wide initiative to monitor coastal birds using a community science effort. So currently, the Audubon Coastal Bird Survey, or ACBS, is conducted in four Gulf Coast states, including Texas. Florida does something that's different, but similar and compatible. They have their own wintering shorebird survey protocol that is very similar to the ACBS protocol. So ACBS was actually initiated after the Deepwater Horizon oil spill in 2010, in part because it was realized in trying to quantify the effects of the oil spill on birds, it became clear that there was relatively little data on, at the time, current population status of birds in the Gulf of Mexico, and especially in the Northern Gulf. So ACBS was initiated initially to sort of track immediate effects, but it has continued and become a larger project that is one of the main goals is to provide a baseline data set and track population trends in the event of other disasters, so that we have this knowledge base in order to make comparisons. And of course, to fill in a gap of knowledge in an area that is relatively understudied compared to other areas of the coastal United States. These surveys data collected during these surveys are actively used to make conservation decisions. Here in Mississippi, we work as part of Audubon. We work with resource managers and beach managers on conservation issues, and we do use data on what birds are congregating where, based on our ACBS surveys. And of course, as any community science project, an important larger objective is sort of capacity building and engaging with the community, to sort of cultivate a conservation ethic, get people involved and knowledgeable about the current state of their coastal birds and coastal habitats. So ACBS across the 4 states uses a standardized, consistent method. So all transects, with a few exceptions, they're typically 1 mile linear transects set along the high tide line of the beach. These are surveyed repeatedly within designated seasonal pulses. So in the fall, which we're in the midst of right now, each route is visited up to 6 times. Sometimes capacity issues reduce that, but the standard goal is 6 times, roughly evenly spaced every 10 days, give or take. Winter pulse in January and February, surveys are visited 3 times. And again, the spring pulse is another longer pulse with 6 visits. So surveyors walk slowly. These tend to take about an hour to cover, sometimes longer if there's a lot of birds or difficult habitat to walk through. But surveyors identify and count all birds within a 1/4 mile buffer, including a 1/4 mile sort of beyond the start and finish, kind of what you can see with scope and binoculars. In addition to counts, there's sort of these metadata that are collected for each survey visit. So things like the tide level, weather factors such as cloud cover and any precipitation, and also quantifying the amount of wrack, which is the washed up debris, vegetation, and organic debris along the high tide line, which can be an important feature for shorebirds because this wrack harbors a lot of invertebrates. Also quantifying human activity on a scale of 0 to 3 and garbage. So ACBS data are submitted into eBird as a repository. There's actually a protocol within eBird for the Audubon Coastal Bird Survey. So many of you who may use eBird might be familiar with the traveling and stationary protocols. Audubon Coastal Bird Survey is essentially a specialized traveling protocol. So you have the, enter your duration and distance, but it also has fields for you to enter in the wrack, the human activity, and the garbage. So these are assessed on a 0 to 3 scale, and the ACBS written protocol has definitions for how to assess and categorize these features. And then additional metadata such as tide level, weather, and any other relevant notes can be just written directly into the comments section. And then once you submit it, things vary by state from there. I can't speak specifically to how it's handled in Texas, but at least here in Mississippi, and I think also in Alabama, there's we have a program eBird or ACBS eBird account. So volunteers that run their own surveys enter these checklists under their own accounts, and then they share it with our program eBird account. So I just want to kind of spend a few minutes highlighting some of the sort of real life uses that we've put for the ACBS data. So it does go into eBird, which of course are used, eBird data as a whole are used for a large variety of studies, but sort of some specific ones that I've either led or been involved with are using Mississippi's ACBS data for a few different projects. One is this upcoming publication in the journal Waterbirds, which uses a variety of focal species and looks at habitat and distribution within the state. And it highlights the importance of barrier islands within Mississippi for certain shorebirds, especially piping plover and red knot, which are almost much more abundant on the barrier islands compared to the mainland. It also looks at pre and post oil spill trends. So here's another use of more general eBird data. I took some pre-oil spill eBird data to estimate relative abundance of certain species, and then looked at both ACBS and non-ACBS eBird data for post-oil spill. And some of the basic trends that came out of this were an apparent increase in brown pelican populations and decrease in piping plover, again, just within Mississippi. And, with some of the analyses in this paper also showed that ACBS specifically is better able to, or has a bit more power to detect regional shorebird trends than eBird, simply because of the very targeted nature of the surveys, and volunteers are trained and regularly trained on shorebird identification and specifically looking for shorebirds. ACBS data has also been submitted to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service as part of their recent critical habitat designation analysis. I believe this public comment has just ended for this designation that they've put forth, but as part of it, ACBS data supported the inclusion of ship and cat islands within Mississippi as part of the new RUFA subspecies of red knot critical habitat designation. And also ACBS is a great opportunity to recite banded birds. And certainly this is something that we emphasize to our volunteers in Mississippi to know what to look for, to report them both to us and to the banders and to the bird banding lab. There's a lot of different bird banding projects in the Gulf, as we saw with American oyster catchers, for instance, black skimmers, and of course piping plovers, many of which are banded on the breeding grounds, but they show up here in the winter and visit regular areas in the winter. So we've amassed our own data set of piping plover band resites, and of course that data also goes back to the original banders. I am aware of a project using essentially Gulf-wide band resites to look at a fairly large-scale study on connectivity and also piping plover survival, annual survival, as a result, or in result of things like hurricanes, oil spill, other threats, environmental threats on the non-breeding grounds. And also just kind of looking again at a little snapshot within my area of Mississippi, ACBS data point to maybe some recent declines in use of Mississippi shores, and also especially low return rates, whether that's survival or immigration. It's hard to say with just Mississippi, but there's relatively low return rates to mainland areas compared to barrier islands. So if you're interested in getting involved in ACBS and contributing to this large community science effort, there are ACBS routes available in Texas, and I've put here the contact information for the people who are responsible or who coordinate ACBS routes within Texas. Again, I'm happy to answer general questions about ACBS, but if you want information about specific routes local to your area in Texas, these would be the folks that you'd want to reach out to. And with that, I'm wrapping up my presentation. Let me see, I can stop share.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Abby. That's great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so up next we have Anika Abbott from Colorado State University.
All right, hello everyone. My name is Annika, and today I'm going to be sharing some research we've been doing here at CSU, looking at bird migration over the Gulf of Mexico using weather surveillance radar data. So I'm really excited to share it with all of you here. So to begin, weather surveillance radar has been used for a long time to look at migratory bird patterns. And the specific radar we're talking about here is next-rad radar. So this is the type of radar that is creating weather forecasts that you would typically see on TV, but it also picks up biological activity like flying birds. And so specifically in the Gulf of Mexico region, these types of radar have been used to look at the movement of birds from their wintering grounds in Central and South America up to their breeding grounds in North America as they cross the Gulf. So the first researcher to really look at this was Sidney Gothrow in 1971, who did a study with two sites, two radar sites, Lake Charles and New Orleans in Louisiana, over a period of 2 years. And he looked to generate figures of the timing of arrival of these trans-Gulf migrants coming up into the northern coast of the Gulf of Mexico. So as you can see in the bottom right here, he made summary plots looking at, on a daily basis during the spring migration, what times of day the highest percentages of migratory birds were arriving. However, since then, not a lot of research has been done looking at this aspect of migration. And so with our study, we aimed to use the more advanced radar we have and the greater amounts of data to look more in depth at this and gain a better understanding. So we looked at 5 sites as are labeled by their 4-letter radar codes here over a period of 10 years. So we looked at sites in Houston, Lake Charles, Louisiana, Mobile, Alabama, and then 2 in the Florida Panhandle. And so birds typically, when they are crossing the Gulf of Mexico, they'll leave the Yucatan Peninsula and surrounding areas just about at sunset, and then they'll fly nonstop all through the night across the Gulf of Mexico. And at some point during the next day, they will make landfall along the northern Gulf Coast. And that's part of why this region is such a hot spot for birding and for migratory bird activity, particularly in the spring. So with our study, we took these 5 sites here, and that gray shaded area around each one is the 100-kilometer sampling range that we used. And then you'll notice a very faint dashed line running parallel to the coast. So that's a line 25 kilometers off of the shore, and it's along that line that we sampled our data from. So by taking the data from off the shore like this, we are able to get a clear picture of trans-Gulf migration without any clutter from things going on land getting in the way. So at each radar, we took data from 3 different extraction points, as you can see here very faintly along that 25-kilometer line. In some cases, one of these points would fall outside of our 100-kilometer sampling range. And so in that case, we removed it from our data just to make sure our results were standardized. So we have ended up with a total of 11 points that we're sampling data from, so about 2 per site. So when we look at a radar, this is typically what you're going to see. So in the top corner here, if you can see my cursor, that's the typical precipitation you would expect to see on a weather surveillance radar. But then all of these little blue dots centered around Houston here are migrating birds. So when birds are flying, they collide with the radar beams and they generate something called reflectivity. And the greater the reflectivity, that corresponds to a higher density of birds in the airspace and more intense migration. So the lighter blue colored dots are going to be less intense migration, and then the darker blue and the green is a lot more birds and more intense migration. So this loop is looking at a span of 1 day of the diurnal periods from about sunrise to sunset for the Houston radar on April 22nd, 2020. So you can see how, as time goes on, the migration ebbs and flows coming in off of the Gulf. You go from very sparse light blue dots to the much more intense dark blue and green. That would be the peak of birds arriving. So we took these radar images from each day at each site, and we created plots with them. So this one specifically that I'm showing you is from our Lake Charles, Louisiana station on April 18th, 2018. So along the vertical axis, we have that reflectivity measurement, or the intensity of migration. And then along the horizontal axis, we have the hour after sunrise. So this spans that whole diurnal period from the beginning of sunrise to even into the nocturnal period of that day after sunset, if the arrivals coming in off the Gulf happen to be late. So we can layer the reflectivity data from each of the 3 sampling points at that site that correspond with the color key in the left there, And then once we have those, all of the data from all 3 points, we can create a mean curve to determine when the peak of migration arrival was that day. So in this case, it was a little bit before 8 hours after sunrise, which corresponds to about 2:45 p.m. local time. So at 2:45 p.m. on this day, that's when the bulk of the birds were arriving along the coast. So looking back at how this looks like on a radar image, you can see here in this image in the top right, the 3 white points are our sampling points, and then you have our scale of intensity here on the right, with purple being pretty low intensity of migration and the yellow being a lot more birds. So at 4.7 hours after sunrise, there's not a lot going on. But if we move up to our peak arrival time for that day, you can see the intensity coming in off the Gulf has really increased. And then as the day goes on, that activity once again subsides. So using these plots from each day over all of the sites, we can generate some broader level summaries of what's going on here. So on a seasonal level, we found that in general, the greatest intensity of migration, the most birds were coming in at our furthest west sites. So that would be Houston in the dark purple and Lake Charles, Louisiana in this more bluish purple color. And in general, migration peaked in intensity between late April and early May across all of the sites. Now we can also look at this more on a day-by-day basis. So with this histogram, we have, again, on the horizontal axis, the hour after sunrise, and then on the vertical axis, we have the number of days or the frequency of a certain peak arrival time. So by looking at this, we can see that in general, 9 hours after sunrise was the most frequent peak arrival time of migration across all sites. And then we can layer the more specific data site by site on top of this to get an idea of how this varies by site. Perhaps an easier way to look at this is with this plot, which is showing the mean arrival time overall for each site. So at all of the sites except for Tallahassee, Florida here in the yellow, we're looking at a pretty similar mean arrival time overall at about 9 hours after sunrise. But then in Tallahassee, it tended to be a little bit earlier, probably more about 8 hours after sunrise. So with this data, we can take a few main takeaways from this. Beginning with, clearly there is variation present in the timing and intensity of trans-Gulf arrivals, and this is likely a result of atmospheric conditions over the Gulf. So that could be things like wind speed, wind direction, and precipitation as these birds are flying across the water. And the fact that this variation exists provides us with a really ideal setup for modeling and further analysis in the future to really dive into why this variation is occurring. So for example, perhaps creating a forecasting system similar to something like birdcast that could really predict when birds are going to be arriving on specific days during these peak migratory times of the year. And this is important to have a greater understanding of arrival time because not only can it get community members in the Gulf of Mexico region more aware of bird migration and excited about when birds are going to be arriving, but it can also be useful in aiding conservation groups in the region like Houston Audubon in protecting these migrants at these key times of year when they are coming in full force. So thank you all for listening today. I'd be happy to take any questions following all of the presentations.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Annika.
Thank you. So up next, we have Anna Valerie.
All right. If you haven't heard me talk enough today, no, I am really excited to be presenting a little bit more about how we at Houston Audubon are using unmanned aerial vehicles or drones and partnering with a lab out of Rice to develop some machine learning to analyze the footage that we take with the drones. So wildlife monitoring, everyone here, we seem to all be in agreement that wildlife monitoring is incredibly important, not only for understanding a population, but for just a baseline population number, but also for looking at for changes over time, especially in response to certain environmental things happening or to better inform conservation and management decisions. But this group also knows that wildlife monitoring can be really expensive and logistically difficult. We've already heard about a couple cool programs like the Audubon Coastal Bird Survey that are ways to kind of help ease the burden of how logistically difficult and expensive these monitoring efforts can be. But thankfully, we're in the era of new technology. And so a lot of these new technologies, kind of like Annika was just describing, can help make monitoring easier, less expensive, and far more accurate than we have been in the past. And so Houston Audubon and a lot of our partners here on this call and up and down the Texas coast participates in colonial waterbird monitoring. And so waterbirds tend to nest on these big nesting islands in a colony, and they can produce tons and tons of birds. So the Texas Colonial Waterbirds Society, which I think is now the Texas Waterbird Society, is a group of partners who gets together, and we monitor all the colonial nesting islands up and down the Texas Gulf Coast. So these are two islands that Houston Audubon helps monitor. The one on the left is Evia Island, which is a man-made island owned by the Port of Houston. And the one on the right is North Deer Island, which is the most productive waterbird colony in Galveston Bay, and one of the larger ones along the Texas coast. And so both of these islands have their own reasons for being tricky to monitor. Evia Island is a little bit raised, and so monitoring from a boat is particularly hard because you can't quite get high enough to see those interior parts of the island. And North Deer is kind of an unusual shape and has really shallow parts and also some elevation that makes it difficult to monitor. So we've started to use unmanned aerial vehicles. I'm just going to start calling them drones from here on out to help monitor these islands. And so, you know, traditional waterbird monitoring methods are often either ground-based, boat-based, or done with small piloted aircraft. And Houston Audubon does not go on the islands during nesting season. So we've taken ground-based off the table, and then small piloted aircrafts have a tendency to be very expensive, difficult logistically to plan, and can prove pretty dangerous for biologists who are using them. So UAVs have started to be used across the biological field, and they have been found to result in more precise count estimates than ground or other methods. So I kind of mentioned this, the Texas Colonial Waterbird Society monitors all of these islands along the coast of Texas. So these are typically done the last week in May or early June. And it's a statewide survey effort coordinated with many partners and many organizations and individuals involved. So we're just looking at a couple of islands out of many that are kind of done every year by a really dedicated group. And so when we go out to monitor one of these islands, we fly pre-planned routes with the drone. And so there's all the kinds of apps where you can plug it in and basically map out exactly how you want the drone to fly. This is an example of a route we flew over Evia Island. Let's see if this works. It is a video. Oh no, the video is not gonna work. So we end up getting images like this. You can see in this image, we've got brown pelicans, there's a bunch of terns, there's also laughing gulls in here, over here. And so it gives us a bird's eye view of what's going on at these islands and lets us see birds that we might have missed in from other methods of surveying. The tricky part is though, you get tons and tons and tons of footage and it takes forever to digitize. And so part of my master's degree was developing this protocol using full motion video to digitize video footage that we took with the drone. And it's great, it's incredibly accurate, but it is very time consuming. And so that time consuming seems to be worth it though, because we found that we were missing tons and tons of birds from Evia Island. So you can see here are some numbers. We missed the first year, we missed 223 brown pelicans, almost 10,000 laughing gulls and 6,000 terns. And we got kind of similar high numbers in 2020 as well. Almost 2,000 brown pelicans missed, almost 5,500 laughing gulls and 2,500 terns. That's a huge chunk of the population that is nesting on this island. So we found out the drones work well. The next step was what to do with all of this video footage that we have. So to put it into perspective, Evie is only a couple acres, and it took me and volunteers over 40 hours to digitize that small island survey. North Deer Island is over 100 acres, and so it's not feasible to sit and digitize every bird on this island without help. And so we partnered with the Rice Data to Knowledge Lab to help address this problem. And several other people are also working on developing artificial intelligence to auto-digitize drone footage. And we have actually reached out to several of these people to share code and everything like that. But their plan is to not only wrangle and kind of explore the data and what we have available, but to develop and train code to automatically identify the birds in the video footage or in the pictures that we take. And so this group, we just started working on this about a month ago, and they're already diving in. And the goal is to not only point out birds. So the first step is to train this AI to select all the birds on an island, but then eventually to be able to name what species of bird each little dot is, even as far down to the different species of tern, which are notoriously hard to identify from the footage and from the boat-based surveys. So, yeah, so successful code and training algorithms could not help identify thousands and thousands of images in a very short amount of time, potentially making this technology super useful for doing that, what we all are aiming to do, monitor wildlife and start to use that data, that more accurate, hopefully, data for informing our conservation work. And so by doing this, we could increase the accessibility of this technology, both drones and this code for use by all the partners, not only in Texas, but maybe other similar islands across the Gulf or even elsewhere. So in summary, these technological advances, I have been working on the drone bird issue for about 4 years now, and maybe even 5 years. But the cameras are just getting good enough to really successfully do this to the point where you can confidently ID some of those birds in flights that do not disturb the birds at all. This next step is really ironing out, making it easy to run these footage and these photos and this footage through a program that can help quickly and efficiently identify all of the different birds. So we're really excited about the potential for using this technology and the potential for it informing conservation decisions and conservation programs. All right. Let's see. So we have, is Stephanie here?
It looks like Stephanie is not here, so the next presentation will be Kelly Martin.
Awesome.
Yes, you need to make her a co-host.
I am making you a co-host now. Thanks, Kelly. Thanks for going a little bit early.
Yeah, no worries. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. All right. Can you see my screen?
Yep.
Yes.
Awesome. Cool. Well, thanks so much, everyone, for tuning in today. My name is Kelly Martin. I'm the Texas Coastal Outreach Coordinator for American Bird Conservancy, running a program called SPLASH, or Stopping Plastics and Litter Along Shorelines. And you can probably guess just from the name sort of what we're all about. So today I'm going to be talking about the trash pollution problem that we face globally, but also specifically what's going on here in Texas and in our region, the impact that this has on all kinds of wildlife, but especially birds, and then the work that we're doing, and also going to share some of the data that we've collected over the last year. So with that, I'm just going to jump right into it. I'm sure everyone here is aware to some extent the amount of trash that is all over our planet, and in particular plastic. And in 2015, researchers published a paper that estimated that the total weight of plastic in our oceans was about 150 million metric tons, which is about 330 billion pounds for those of us who aren't as familiar with the metric system. And in addition to that, another about 8 million metric tons, or about 17.6 billion pounds, enter the ocean each year. So every year we're adding more and more to that already pretty massive total. So that's a pretty crazy number to wrap our head around. There's just tons and tons of plastic out there, unfortunately. And so where is all that plastic coming from? Well, we've found that 80% of all marine debris, which is all trash in the ocean, plastic and otherwise, comes from land. And a big reason for this is because of watersheds. And so if you're not familiar with watersheds, I like to think of it as like a bathtub where all of the water from a given area just flows to one sort of central location. And so for us in our region, that central location is the Galveston Bay. This colored in area here on the map is the greater Galveston Bay watershed. And so we're all a part of that. And so trash can very easily get from land to our coast because it will flow into storm drains and then into a river or a bayou. And then from there flows to the coast and potentially the ocean. And so while only 20% or so is littered directly into the ocean or the coastal environment, 80% of the trash in our oceans is coming from land-based sources. And so what exactly is the situation in Texas in terms of trash here? And unfortunately, though we like to brag that everything is bigger in Texas, in this case, that's maybe not something to brag about because we do have the worst trash of any state in the United States. A collection of data found that Texas has the highest average weight of debris per mile surveyed of any state in the US. And another study found that trash accumulates on the Texas coast 10 times faster than on the coasts of other Gulf states. So we kind of have a perfect storm here where we have tons of trash on land that can easily make its way to the coast through watersheds. And we're also getting lots of trash washing up on our shores from other places around the Gulf or even potentially around the world, since trash can travel on ocean currents. And then in terms of what's happening specifically in our region within Texas, I think it's helpful to pull this map up again, because as you can see, our watershed has both Houston and Dallas-Fort Worth in it, which means about half of the entire population of Texas lives in this watershed. And that means about 14 million people's worth of trash is also in this watershed. And hopefully all of that ends up in a landfill, but as we know, sometimes it does end up in the environment. And so then it can make its way to Galveston Bay. So that's definitely a huge challenge for our bay in that there's just so much trash that can make its way here. And, our city is known for its diversity of people, but also the diversity of species that call this area home. So how is all of this trash impacting these species and especially birds? So this has been mentioned in some previous presentations, but entanglement is a serious threat to birds. We see birds that have fishing line wrapped around their legs, and this can cause them to not be able to fly, to forage, to escape predators, do all of the things that they need to do on a daily basis to survive. And they can also cause injuries or infections. So that fishing line might wrap around so tight that it cuts into the bird's skin and can essentially amputate their leg. So obviously that has long-term implications for the survival of that bird. And the other sort of major threat is ingestion, which is when an animal eats trash and especially plastic. And so that can cause damage to internal organs as they try to digest that plastic. It can also give an animal a false sense of satiation. So they think they're full because their stomach is just filled with this plastic that they haven't been able to digest. But unfortunately, they're not getting any nutrients from that plastic. And so as a result, they may actually starve. Sorry, just fixing my mic here really quick. And then another potential issue is we're discovering that plastic in the marine environment can accumulate toxins and bacteria on it. And so if a bird eats that plastic, it will then eat those chemicals and those toxins as well, which can accumulate in its system and potentially cause long-term health impacts as well. So all kinds of threats that we're worried about. That's kind of the doom and gloom part. But now we're going to move on to the more hopeful part of this and talk about what we're actually doing to try and address this problem. So Splash, our mission is creating a cleaner environment for people, birds, and other wildlife in the greater Houston-Galveston region through community science, education, and outreach. And I'm just going to briefly talk about sort of what those mean in terms of what we're doing on a daily basis. So we do monthly trash cleanups all throughout Houston and Galveston. We do at least one per month, and we love having volunteers come out to help us with those. We also engage local schools or summer camps or just offering all kinds of educational programming to try and engage the next generation in this issue and give them the tools they need to hopefully take leadership and start to address this issue. And then of course, we also do outreach, anything we can do to raise awareness about this problem. And then something that we do as sort of a part of everything, all of our programs, is we collect this data during our trash cleanups with volunteers or with student groups about the trash that we're actually finding all across our region. And so I'm going to show you some of that data right now from the past year. So this data was collected at sites along bayous in Houston, along the shorelines of Galveston Bay, along Gulf of Mexico beaches. So a variety of sites. And we covered about 1,342 feet of shoreline or bayou shoreline for these surveys. And so here are the top 15 most common items that we are finding during our trash surveys. There's sort of a lot of information here to try and absorb, but some of the big takeaways are that plastic fragments are the most common. You can see those on the left side of the graph. And that's really not that surprising, just because of the top 15 most common items, 9 of those are plastic. And so those larger items like water bottles and plastic bags and food wrappers and things like that, over time, they are going to break down into smaller and smaller pieces. And so then we find, sometimes hundreds of these fragments at any given site. I think another big takeaway is that, one of the most common things we find besides fragments are plastic bottles. So if any of you out there have not gotten a reusable water bottle yet, now is the time. We would love to stop seeing these plastic water bottles in our environment. So, just looking at this list is sort of helpful to understand what some of the most common things are and what we can maybe do on a daily basis to try and reduce the amount of things, these things that we use and then may end up in the environment. The other thing that we're doing with this data is we are going to submit it to a statewide database. There's the website texaslitter.org, and that database is going to be publicly accessible. So not only can you and I go and check it out and just look at the data that all these different groups have submitted, but also decision makers across our state can hopefully use this information to inform sort of bigger picture solutions in terms of waste management or other policies that they can enact to try and prevent this stuff from getting into our environment in the first place. So yeah, this is a year's worth of trash we have collected, and we're going to continue during these surveys for the duration of our project. So we'll keep updating this and keep adding this information to the Texas Litter Database. And in the meantime, if you want to connect with us, definitely check out our website, follow us on social media. Again, we would love to have you come volunteer with us, or if you know a school teacher, we'd love to work with their school. And unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to make it to the mingling happy hour after this. And so if you do have any questions, send them to the chat and I'm happy to answer them there, or feel free to use that email and shoot me an email. I'm happy to answer questions. And that's all I've got for you all today.
Thank you so much, Kelly. So it looks like we have Stephanie is with us now, right?
Stephanie, you ready to present?
I am just trying to find the mute.
No worries. You can share your screen.
So we have Stephanie Martinez from U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service.
And I'll start my video and remember how to share my screen. I see it on the bottom. Okay, hi everyone. I'm Stephanie Martinez and I work for U.S. Fish and Wildlife. I work for the Texas Chenier Plain Refuges Complex, which includes Anahuac, McFadden, Texas Point, and Moody. And we're all along the upper Texas coast. And right now, my current job is outdoor recreation planner, but I got my degree in biology. And when I first started with Fish and Wildlife, I did a research paper on the pair ponds of mottle ducks. And I was going to drop the link for y'all in the chat so that you will be able to look it up later if you'd like. And basically what we did, the mottle duck is an indicator species for us, which means that they are a good indicator of if we're doing things correctly. So they need different types of habitat, and we mostly have coastal marsh habitat, but they need something different for brood rearing. They need something different for their molting habitat and for their nesting habitat. And what we found was they use these ponds, they're called loafing areas, which we call them pear ponds. And it's just a little place for, it's a territorial place. And what'll happen is the male will go sit on this pond and protect it from the other males or pairs that fly over. He'll actually jump up and go chase them off. And then the female will be sitting on the nest. And so he will go get her and bring her back to the pear pond, and she'll rest and bathe and eat, and then he will take her back. And so he is territorial, like I said, and he'll protect these pear ponds for her. So we wanted to know, we had a good idea of what kind of nesting habitat they like. They like, you know, something dry, they're not going to get flooded, and real thick like Spartina. And so we didn't really know what they preferred for these pear ponds. So that's what I did. So what we did is we marked over 18,000 pond areas with ArcGIS, and we actually went out and chose 300 random ponds. We put them all in a random number. We numbered each one, put them all in a random number generator, and then went out to see if that particular pond was being used for a pear pond. And as we're riding around doing this, we did it by airboat, foot traffic, or ATV, or walking if it was close enough to a road. And we also marked any ponds that we saw them jump off of on our way, you know, so we could see if the random ones were being used. And then we also could see if they were using other areas. And once we went out there, we took the depth at 3 different sections and then averaged that. We, if it was a massive pond, we'd take the GPS with the airboat around it and then measure it that way. If it was just a small pond, we'd just measure it by hand. Or if it was medium-sized pond, I'd just walk around the edge. So we measured the depth, the acreage or the area, and if it had emergent and submergent vegetation, and then the height of the surrounding vegetation of the around the pond. And basically what we found was that they don't like the tall vegetation at all. Like any kind of cattail or Phragmites was too tall for them. They like the Disticulus, the joint grass that's real low. They liked the grazed areas because the cattle would keep all the vegetation around low. So they wanted to be able to see, but still be isolated, if that makes sense. And so we also took salinity. And again, we took it in 3 different sections and averaged the salinity of that pond. So we found that they preferred, or they were found mostly in the intermediate, but it wasn't proportional to how many ponds were available. So they really prefer a freshwater pond, but on the coastal marshes, there's just not a lot of that available. So they went to the intermediate. So that was number 1. And then brackish was next, and then saline and fresh. So we found, that's what we found. And then I think we need to do an invert study because they like to eat the inverts. And so we wonder how much it is not only habitat type, but what's in there that they're feeding on, because they seemed to choose these ponds to be a good area for success for their raising their eggs, high nutrition, safety, and so that they'd have a good success. And that's about it. We do a lot of different things with mottled ducks. We do some telemetry work, we ban them. So we just love them. But that's about it for the pear pond stuff. And I'm gonna drop that link. This is a very old study too. Like I said, this is when I first got here. And I'm not supposed to do any questions right now, right?
We'll do questions afterwards. So thank you so much. I'm excited to see the link. But we actually have a break for a couple minutes so everybody can get up, stretch their legs, get a drink, and then we'll be back right at 5:35. So we can jump back in with Nerdle Patrol. So don't be late coming back. You got about 10 minutes to go take a break and grab something to drink. We'll see you all back here in a few.
Thank y'all.
Thanks, Stephanie.
Thank you.
All right, everybody, this is your 1 minute warning. We're gonna get started in just a second. So grab your drink and come on back.
How do I say your name?
Jace.
Jace. Okay. I need to make sure I get everyone's names right.
Oh no. People call me all kinds of things. You can't screw that up.
Jace Tunnel.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's it.
Good.
We're good to kick it off, Royce. You're muted.
Oh.
There you go.
Okay, so here we are. We're ready for the second round of presentations, and we have Jace Tunnel with Mission Aransas National Estuary and Research Reserve.
Perfect. Okay. Well, I appreciate that. Kelly Martin really set this up nice for me coming in. I mean, she got the whole basics of plastics. And so, like Roy said, my name is Jace Tunnel at the Mission Aransas Research Reserve. We're located at the University of Texas Marine Science Institute. And so we are an education outreach and a research program. And it's actually 29 research reserves around the country. And so we're the only one in Texas. We have a citizen science project called Nurdle Patrol. And so that's what I'll talk to you about today. Nurdles are small plastic pellets. They're the basis of almost everything plastic. So all that stuff that Kelly was talking about, the plastic water bottles and all that stuff, we're finding washing down the rivers, in the bays and on our beaches. All the Nurdles made all that stuff. So these Nurdles are getting out into the environment before they're even made into a product. And so you might be thinking, well, how do they get out into the environment? Well, it's throughout the entire supply chain. So it's from the manufacturing site for where they make these pellets to when they offload or they unload them onto like cars, rail cars, or trucks or ships. They can get out along the transportation lines. And then once they reach their final destination, they can actually get out into the environment there. And so what happens once they get into the environment? They a little bit get on the ground here or there. It rains, then it gets into the rivers, then into the bay, then into the ocean, and back up on our beaches. So we were finding these in massive amounts in certain areas of the country, especially Galveston Bay. And I'm going to show you some data that we've been gathering. And so this is my daughter Parker here. She's holding up a Nurdle. But down at the very bottom, you can see they're all different shapes, sizes. They're all, about 4 millimeters or smaller. But they can have different colors, and depending on how long they're in the sun, they can change their resin. So these kind of opaque ones eventually start turning yellow color. It's been a problem for a long time, these Nurdles coming out. In 1992, the Environmental Protection Agency came out with a report called Plastic Pellets in the Aquatic Environment. And right here, what you see in the middle is a black and white photo, and that's the intestine of a seabird. And so they have listed in this document, and you can Google this. It's you can get a PDF of it. There's about 10 pellets in that intestinal tract, and they list about 80 species of birds that they knew about at the time that were eating these. Now we know there's actually hundreds of species that are eating these pellets. And like Kelly said, plastic in their gut is not good, and that can they can either starve to death or it can entangle their intestines and to where they can't eat anything else. And again cause issues. And then what we worry about is the harmful chemicals that are absorbed onto these pellets, since they act like sponges in the environment, picking up harmful chemicals in the water. Are these animals eating these pellets, and do those chemicals come off of the pellet once they're in the gut? And it is for like fish, does it get into the muscle tissue that then we're eating? We don't know that for sure yet. There is some research looking into that right now. So hopefully in a couple of years, we would know. But our methodology is real easy. And we've been transferring everything into Spanish, kind of translating everything into Spanish. So I put kind of both up here. But, you go out for 10 minutes, you look for nurdles. Once you go for 10 minutes, you count how many you have, and you go to nurdlepatrol.org and you put it into the data sheet, and it automatically shows up on a map. Your data will show up on a map. The map looks like this. It's color coded based on concentrations of one person for 10 minutes. And so, you can go out in a group of 20 people and look for 30 minutes, but the database is going to take your information and it's going to standardize it. And so these colors are the standardized numbers, which is the concentration of pellets you found in a 10-minute period for one person. And so that way we can compare what's going on in Houston compared to what's going on in New York versus Oregon or something, something like that. And so you'll notice there's some greens here. The greens are 0 nurdles collected. 0 is data also, And so look at Florida. Florida has a lot of greens on the West Coast, right? Well, Florida has very few manufacturing sites of nurdles. Once you go west along the Gulf of Mexico, you start getting higher concentrations of nurdles until you get to the purples, where it's just, over 1,000 in a 10-minute period. Well, Houston, once you go west, from Florida, you get the higher concentration of plastic manufacturing sites too. And so, the map of concentration of nurdles versus concentration of manufacturing sites matches up almost exactly. And let's zoom in here to Texas. And so this is a closer look. It's not uncommon to find over 100 nurdles in a 10-minute period anywhere along the Texas coast. You'll see some of these inland areas. These are along railroads or along streams or along the fence line of a manufacturing site. And so, there's been over 100 railroads that have been sampled to date, and almost all of them find pellets along them because that's the way they transport them. So let's zoom into Galveston Bay here. There's been there's several groups that have volunteers that go out and monitor. And they're either doing their water monitoring that they've been doing for years, and they incorporated Nurdle Patrol into it, or they've got their own Nurdle Patrol citizen science project going. What you see here is the further up you go into the bay is where you find a lot of the manufacturing sites, and you find some really high concentrations of pellets there. Now, if you go to nurdlepatrol.org, you can click on these dots, and it will actually give you all the metadata. So you'll know when it was collected, how many people were collecting, what the concentration was, exactly where they were, things like that. So feel free to go there and look around. We've had 4,300 volunteers to date that have sent in data to nurdlepatrol.org, over 9,700 surveys at over 4,200 sites. And we've got 135 partner organizations we're working with. And I'm going to show you the bags that we send out to try to initiate people or organizations to start collecting data. And then these teacher kits I'll tell you about too. Oh, and then we came out with an app back in May. We came out with an app, and you can basically put your nurdle data in about 15 seconds, and then it shows up on that map. So you can download it if you have Android or iPhone. Just go to your app store and get it. It's free. Startup kits. This is what we're sending to organizations that want to get involved. It's real easy to get one. All you do is email me and say, hey, our organization wants to get a startup kit. We've got 100 glass vials. There's tweezers, field notebooks, informational cards that you can give volunteers to show them what to do, how to do a survey. And then we put some fun stuff in there, like, we got t-shirts and buffs and stuff like that. But we have a flash drive that has this presentation on it, so organizations can put their own logo on it, give a presentation to their volunteers about what's going on with nurdles, what are the impacts, solutions, stuff like that. The only thing is you have to commit to doing 1 10-minute survey per month. That's easy. And then the other is send us your logo so we can put it on our website as a partner. And then the other thing is we got a lot of teachers saying, hey, we want to be able to do we don't want to do a survey, but we want to teach our students about how plastics get into the ocean and what the impacts are and what solutions are. So we came up with this curriculum, and it's all in this metal box that we'll send teachers for free. They just go to turtlepatrol.org, click on news, and there's an article about the teacher kits with a URL in there. They fill it out. We've given away close to 500 of these since February. This is my last slide. If y'all want to know more information about Nurdle Patrol, I'd say get on the Nurdle Patrol Facebook page. People are posting on a daily basis on what they're finding and where. If there's a spill of nurdles, if there's research that comes out, even if there's birds have been eating nurdles, that it'll come out on there. That people are posting all the time. There's about 2,700 people on there. And then of course the website's got a training video, little short training video, and you can check out the data on the map site and stuff. But if you want to email me or get a hold of me of anything else, it's a simple email, jace@utexas.edu. I'd be happy to talk with you. And I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. So up next, we have Yvette Stewart with Audubon, Texas.
Oh, Yvette, your sound's not working. Okay, everybody. So Yvette is having some mic problems, but she's gonna log out and log right back in. And we have been running ahead of schedule miraculously, so I think we'll be okay, giving her a minute to come back in and present everything. So I just want to mention again, if you do have questions for any of the presenters that you want to get out of your mind now, you're welcome to use the chat. Otherwise, we will have the social hour chat question time starting around 6:40. All right, we'll just give you that minute to log back in. Here we go. Oh no, it's not working. That's okay. Hey, Yvette, if you want to do try and figure it out, I will scoot you to the end if that works. Barry, are you ready to go?
I'm ready.
All right, I'm making you a co-host now. Thanks for being ready.
All right. Here we go. Hi guys, I'm Barry Maven. I'm conservation specialist with Houston Audubon, and I manage the Natives Nursery. So we like to talk a lot about native plants and why do native plants equal birds? Native plants are really crucial to our conservation efforts. And that's because native plants really support birds. There we go. Native plants provide the right food at the right time for birds. The way they do this is, of course, by not only providing nectar from their flowers, seeds, and berries, but also supporting the insects that birds need to feed their young and, just develop into adult birds. And bird diets vary throughout the year and developmental stages. So the plants have the ability to provide exactly the right food at the right time. So by the time the young birds are growing out of eating insects, the berries and the seeds are developing on the plants. Migration timing is also tied to food availability. If the birds arrive here and the plants have not, leafed out enough to provide food for the insects and mostly the caterpillars and larvae that the adult birds need to eat and also to feed their babies, they're in a big trouble. And this is something that we have been seeing recently is, through climate change, some birds arriving too early or plants and insects becoming available either erratically or not soon enough for the birds that are arriving. And also, of course, habitat. Native plants, that birds are used to seeing provide the right kind of habitat for nesting materials, the right
combination of understory trees and upper canopy that the birds need to feed in those different levels on the different things that the plants supply. And non-natives can be detrimental or fatal. One of the really prominent problems here in Houston is the Nandina. And the Nandina plant is an invasive non-native species, and the berries on that plant can be very toxic. Often see things like cedar waxwings will take advantage of the Nandinas in the winter, and that can be fatal to them. So at Houston Audubon, we carry a lot of plants. Our main natives nursery is located at the Edith L. Moore Nature Sanctuary on the west side of Houston. And kind of our specialty at our nursery is the real deal native plants. So what do we mean by real deal? Well, these plants are hyper local. There are a lot of native species that you can find over, maybe the entire Midwest or even over almost all of the United States. But we make sure that the plants that we grow come from Harris County and the adjacent counties, the directly adjacent counties, so that we know they're used to the kind of weather patterns, soils, and everything else that we have going on in our area. We try to ensure that the seeds are wild collected or gathered from plants that we know originally came from wild collected seed. So the way we do that is we have a wonderful cadre of volunteers who go out to local properties that we know have, genuine native plants that haven't been seeded from, commercial seed. And they collect these seeds, throughout the late summer and fall during the proper season for the different species. We use very minimal soil amendment. We want to make sure that these plants are going to be able to go directly into restoration projects and not need any extra special care other than a little bit of extra watering right at the beginning. So we don't baby them, and they are, of course, developed in this area, evolved in this area, so they can handle all the different weird kinds of soil that we have. We don't use any herbicides or pesticides because, of course, a lot of those chemicals can persist on the plant and still continue to affect insects after you take them home to your yard. And we also make sure that we don't use nativars. Nativars, in case you don't know, is basically a native species that has been specifically cultivated or developed, usually for maybe an alternate like color of flower or some other quality. So technically it is still a native species, but it has been altered from its like wild state in order to serve some other purpose, usually aesthetics for people. So the reason that we are so invested in providing these high quality plants is because of our work with our projects and partners. So not only do we use the plants for our own restoration efforts on our own properties, we work with a lot of different agencies around the state and around the city and county, and we consult with them, give them advice on we can provide plant lists depending on what kind of a site they have and what their goals are, whether they're looking for a kind of like a pollinator garden, or they're looking to do like a pocket prairie, or they're actually working on an actual restoration project. And so some of the entities that we've worked with in the past, we sell to the public at Edith L. Moore. So we work with homeowners and also HOAs and try to, inform people about how native plants can serve the same purpose, and they can look just as groomed and attractive and give just as much curb appeal as your lawn and your boxwood. We work with state and federal programs, especially programs like, Monarch Heroes and other, programs that give money to nonprofit entities to encourage them to spend this money on making pollinator-friendly habitats and bird-friendly habitats. So some of those nonprofits and municipal entities are, of course, city and county entities. We work a lot with like the Houston Parks Board, Memorial Parks Conservancy. We work with many different schools and a lot of the other like nature discovery center and stuff like that. A lot of the other entities around town to, help them get the native plants that they need for different projects that they're working on. And we even have scouts that are installing, pollinator gardens and little small pocket prairies on community sites. We also reach out to commercial and recreation entities, such as working with golf courses to, even though it is a very heavily groomed area, they have a lot of places where they can use native plants instead of commercial landscape plants. Same thing with office buildings and industrial parks, kind of the same thing, that you can still have a very groomed appearance while using certain native species instead of invasive species. And here's a little overview of where we are. So as you can see, and on this map, this is a map of the properties that we either have consulted with, given them advice, plant lists, gone out to see the site and given recommendations, or we've provided actual plants to their project, such as the schools. Like I said, the pocket prairies, our volunteers go out and do a lot of, outreach with the schools and other entities to make sure that, these projects are successful and that somebody can, steward the plants and the project forward and it doesn't kind of, fall by the wayside. One of our big investments is really trying to make sure that once somebody spends all the time and energy to put in this pocket prairie or pollinator garden, that once that person kind of maybe moves on from that job or, for whatever reason, they can't be directly in control of that piece of land, that there's other people there to take ownership of that. And it really becomes like an important part of the community instead of, just kind of reverting back to either an unmanaged plot of weeds that eventually gets grass again, or, non-traditional and non-native plants. As we zoom in a little bit, you can see these are all schools. The green is schools, the yellow is pocket prairies. And then we have some other, some restoration projects and some municipal, like Parks Board and other city projects. And so this is where we're kind of headed in the future. We are just about to open the Entergy Coastal Natives Nursery. It's located at our coop in High Island. What this is going to offer us is a lot more space, which is great. We're going to be able to grow out a little bit larger plants, get some more shrubs and trees, which are really a desirable thing to not just our, public, but also for restoration. It's going to be a lot more restoration focused. So we will probably have a lot of grasses and other plants that maybe might not be appropriate for the garden. We're going to have more species, and that's going to include coastal species, like brackish and sand and salt tolerant species. And that is all I have. I'll be at the happy hour to answer any questions.
Thank you, Barry. So did we get Yvette back?
Yep.
You did. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Let me just get my share screen up. And we are going to jump ahead to the Bird City, Texas presentation, and then I'll go back to the ACL youth presentation. So let me just get this going. Thank you for your patience.
No problem.
All righty. Okay, great. So thank you so much for having me. I am very excited to talk to you about both of my programs. My name is Yvette Stewart and I work with Audubon, Texas. And in my role, I take care of two different programs. So we're going to start with the Bird City, Texas program, which is urban conservation. And so Houston, for those on the call who don't know, Houston was certified as one of our 4 inaugural communities in February of 2020. Now, of course, nothing went according to plan in 2020. So we are just really tickled to be here, even though it's a virtual engagement instead of seeing you folks face to face. And so with that kind of background, I'm going to tell you what the heck is Bird City, Texas, and why is it an important program? Then I'm going to kind of finish up by telling you the amazing work that Houston has done, and especially what Houston Audubon has helped to lead. And then we'll flop over to our youth engagement programs. So first, in order to understand why Bird City, Texas came about, I need everybody on the call to understand how important Texas is for birds. So we have approximately 650 to 700 species of birds that have made their way through our state. 647 of them are, normal sites, and then there's a wide variety of other birds that may be rarities that we find or may just pass through very small parts of our state. But flying over the Gulf of Mexico to get to Texas and then keep going on the rest of their migration path is a huge endeavor for many of the bird species. And sometimes that requires, 20 to 30 hours of nonstop flight. And when they get here, they are exhausted. So these really tiny, beautiful birds that bring so much joy to people need some help and some support once they hit our state in particular, but as they're also moving throughout the rest of the US. And not only are these birds potentially exhausted from all of that flight, they get here and they have so many different threats that they have to overcome. And so part of Bird City, Texas is acknowledging where these threats are coming from, AKA humans, and then building up ways to deal with these threats. And why should we care about these little gems that fly? Besides the fact that they are beautiful and they bring many people joy, when birds are healthy, humans are healthy. They are key indicators of air quality, what's happening with our water cycle. They tell us if we have enough open green spaces. They tell us more about coastal erosion and what's happening with climate change and water coming inland. So they're just so important. They are keystone species. They help us understand what we are doing to our environment and then look for ways to improve. Now, Texas is not the first state to realize that birds need help, but we are the most rigorous. We are really leading the charge with our programming because it is deeply based in science. Okay, the Bird City, Texas program is a partnership between Audubon, Texas and Texas Parks and Wildlife. It took about 3.5, 4 years of behind the scenes conversations and looking at science to understand what this program was going to be. And then we had a pilot year to learn, is it actually feasible? And then came 2019 when we actually opened the program up and we had communities like Houston apply for this certification, leading to our inaugural communities in February of 2020. So what is this program? As I said, it is science-based, and we have broken it into 2 different levels. So as of this moment, everybody that has applied for Bird City, Texas certification is at that basic level. Okay, this has 9 required actions that we'll get to in a moment. And then it has 3 other categories with 48 different options, and a minimum of 17 of those options have to be selected. We're hoping that communities will start to go for high flyer status in just a little bit. And what we're trying to do there is encourage people to take the next steps. So as I said, community engagement has these 3 different factors to it. Sorry, not community engagement. Bird City, Texas has 3 different factors to it. The first one is community engagement. It's all about getting the average folks out into the community and doing things to benefit the green spaces, both for their health and the health of birds. I'm sorry, I don't know why this is going that fast. I'm going to go back for a second. Habitat enhancement is about cleaning up our spaces, like Barry was just saying, bringing in more native plants, helping to make the environment as healthy as possible for birds, and then creating safer spaces. So that usually means taking care of human activity to make it more bird friendly. So we'll get into those in just a moment. Okay, so here is for community engagement. Some of the activities that a community might take are things like host a completely native plant sale. Right? As Barry was just talking about, native plants are crucial for a healthy environment. We also ask communities that they engage partners in long-term conservation and monitoring through either things like eBird or iNaturalist, things that can be utilized by impassioned citizen science. And the last thing that we ask is hosting a native speaker or workshop series that focuses on birds, wildlife, and habitat. And all three of these things are things that Houston Audubon and the Houston community are doing. Okay, so that's just 3 of the 5 that they submitted. And all of this information is on our Bird City, Texas website. I don't want to spend too much time going through each and every criteria. Going towards habitat enhancement, there are some really awesome activities that are happening throughout Houston that are helping birds have healthy spaces to rest and breed and recover from those migration. So a couple of things that Houston is doing is 1, modifying and improving existing habitats for birds, wildlife, and native plants. We ask communities to keep track of the work that they are doing. So in their application, Houston said that they had taken care of 150 acres for these explicit purposes of making them healthier spaces for birds. And they have plans to add up to another 1,000 acres, which is huge because when you look at a city like Houston that is growing exponentially, to be able to say, we're keeping this space for birds, for wildlife, for native plants, it is so important. It's incredible work that Houston Audubon is participating in. Another example of the criteria that have been successfully undertaken in the Houston application would be creating and conserving wildlife corridors and connecting these different habitats that have now been preserved. Okay. Yes, birds can fly, most of them, but that doesn't mean that they can easily get to the next habitat, right? Depending on food availability, depending on what's happening with humans, depending on things like light pollution, it could be a struggle for birds to get from place to place, and especially those other critters that birds rely on, like insects. So these wildlife corridors are really important, and we're very proud of the work that's being done in Houston to secure these corridors for the continuation of birds and all sorts of animals. Okay. Couple more things here. So for the creating safer spaces for birds, you guys saw that list of threats earlier. It is no joke, especially light pollution and especially outdoor cats. They are leading to huge declines. And if you follow anything on social media, you'll have seen that in fall migration this year, on a single night, buildings in New York City collected between 300 and 500 birds. So it's a really big deal that we are actively working to improve city habitats for our wildlife. And again, Houston is just leading the charge with this. They're doing phenomenal work. So some examples of the activities that Houston Audubon is helping with, they are educating building owners or the architect community about bird-friendly buildings. So again, kind of less light deflection off windows of a certain size, those kind of things. So birds can actually move around those buildings. Birds don't understand glass. That's why they usually make impact. Other things that Houston is participating in, the National Lights Out campaign. We'll get to that in just a moment. There's different types of transportation. So whenever we can reduce the number of cars on the road, the number of lights used to light those roads, we're actually benefiting the wildlife around us. And the last thing that Houston is doing is prohibiting feeding of ducks on community managed properties. And that might seem counterproductive to helping birds, but the reality is when we feed ducks, a lot of times people are feeding things like bread, which are actually not good for the ducks. It's like too much candy for a little kid, it'll make them sick. But also it increases the waste products that they create and pollutes those water sources that everybody needs. So again, even though it may sound like it's bad, we're not actually feeding the animals, it ends up benefiting them. So we're really proud of that work. And all this work is going into maintaining, but it's not just going into avoid. The folks at Houston Audubon, in partnership with the Houston Parks and Rec Department, they send in an annual report to the Bird City, Texas partners. Again, that's Audubon, Texas, and Texas Parks and Wildlife. So they are keeping themselves accountable, and then we're trying to help make sure that the things that they're measuring make sense for your community. So it's just great work that's happening. Now, this is a little activity that I do with many communities when I'm able to go around and speak to folks. And so I encourage everybody that's on the call right now to just take a minute and think about what your community looks like right now versus what it might look like in 10 years or in 25 years. And I want you to understand that many people are scared about what's happening in Texas. Again, we're experiencing like exponential growth within our communities. And so to see that happening and to think that you're not going to have any green spaces, well, the Bird City, Texas program is a way to kind of fight that. So the work that Houston is doing, like preserving those 1,000 acres of open lands, that's actually going to benefit everybody in your community, not just the bird lovers, not just the birds. It helps everybody. So I just want to show you that Houston is one of many communities at this point. So we have Bastrop near Austin, we have Dallas, there's Houston, we have Port Aransas, San Antonio, Surfside Beach, and Galveston. These are all of the certified communities at this point. We hope to have a couple more in the next 5 months or so. And again, Houston is leading the charge. Actually, it was very helpful for Houston to get this because San Antonio was spurred on after seeing what Houston did. And also, I think Austin is kind of eyeing the work that you guys are doing out there. And so you're inspiring new communities to step up their game for both their people and their wildlife. Just to call out some of the actions, again, community engagement has been a big part. And so here you can see this old numbers, okay, it's 3 years old, but the City Nature Challenge, which is an iNaturalist platform to kind of observe all the species of insects and plants and birds, Houston was kind of kicking butt. And those are some proud numbers. And so I'm excited to see what you guys can do this next round. And again, Lights Out Texas. Houston is a huge proponent of this. You guys have done an amazing social media blitz to get folks to turn out their lights during heavy migration in the spring and in the fall. As I said earlier, New York sees these tragedies. Well, all of our major cities in Texas are on a similar list to New York. We have a lot of light confusion that leads to sick birds. And I know somebody else is going to talk about that in a little bit, so that's why I'll stop there. And lastly, Houston is doing great work to promote keeping cats inside. Now, cat lovers and bird lovers will go head to head on this topic, so I'm not going to get too far into it, but we know that cats can provide a lot of damage to different natural ecosystems. And so again, just educating, that's the first step to making behavioral change. So we're very proud of the work that Houston Audubon is doing to get that information out there. So everything that Houston is doing is great. It's a good step forward. There is no magic bullet. We just need every person to keep making the better choice. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen there. How am I doing on time? I'm sorry, I might be going a little long.
A little long, but I think we'll be okay.
Okay, I'll go through ACL really quick.
Also, I swear we didn't pay Yvette to come in and just tout everything.
No, but I also am just super impressed with Houston and also the review folks who helped make this decision. We're very impressed with the work that you guys were doing. So, all right, getting on to my high school program. Like I said, I'll try and keep it quick, short, and sweet. So thank you for having me to chat with you. We've already talked about my 2 different roles, so we'll just skip right past that. I have been involved in environmental education since 2009 when I did my AmeriCorps service year. And the thing about EE is that everybody focuses on the young kids, which is great. Little kids getting outside in nature is wonderful and we need that, but EE is crucial to all ages. It can be transformative. So It's in direct service to the TEAC standards that we're all trying to reach. You know, environmental education uses observation, critical thinking, detailed note-taking, etc. And so these are all skills that are essential, not just for success in school, but also in life, right? EE is key to well-designed and executed science education, and that leads to smart citizens. That's what we want. When I came into my position with Audubon, we had these two different programs. So Trex was a 5-day, 4-night camping experience for students from traditionally like under-resourced or underserved communities. And then Audubon Conservation Leaders for Young Women is a program that is in partnership with the Young Women's Preparatory Network, and we have 4 schools involved in the program throughout the state. So both of these programs were trying to give students an opportunity to, create a sense of wonder, a sense of place, an identity that was wrapped into what was happening in their communities, and then also to show them the path forward to careers in STEM with a specific focus on like conservation or ecology. Because we want students to love and understand what's going around in the world, but that only happens when they're actually taught these opportunities. It did not go the way we wanted it to. Trex actually ended up failing as a program, but it was a huge learning opportunity for Audubon, Texas. So some of the key takeaways, if you are interested in engaging youth, and by youth, I mean teenagers, right? First, you cannot be transactional with them. Transactional things are like, you just show up once at their school and you get them to come out on a camping trip for 5 days. Yeah, it was awesome, it was fun. And then you ghost them because you don't offer any backup, and they ghost you because you didn't do anything that actually helped them, grow as a person. So we did not succeed in the things that we were trying to do with that program. ACL, on the other hand, is super, fruitful. We're really having a good experience there because we're embedded in the schools. We are working with these students multiple times, and we're building a community and we're building relationships. Right? So being embedded and taking the time to actually get to know the students is so crucial for teenage engagement, but we don't always have that opportunity as educators. Second thing that I learned was being on the go. So Trex, it was like one thing, next thing, go, go, go. And that is exhausting. And we don't actually get a chance to connect with students, and the students don't connect with these beautiful parks that we were taking them to. So instead, we kind of focus on a go on kind of method. And what I mean by that is, imagine sitting down to a starlit dinner outside. And instead of being rushed through dinner, someone says, go on, keep telling me your story, tell me more, right? That's the kind of engagement that we're looking for with these students. And once we have that, we keep it going through active feedback and active listening. Teenagers are freaking smart. They are compassionate. They know what's going on in their world. They see all the changes that are coming towards them. And they have incredible, ingenious ways to deal with this stuff. And so anybody who's engaging with students at this age, we really need you to open up and listen to those students. And then once you hear them, react to it. So, the students have been very instrumental in improving the ACL program, because every year and every session, really, we do some give and take. We ask them what went well and what didn't, and then we tweak it based on that. Another part of that is pivoting to their needs. And so a great example of this is we had a meeting shortly after the January 6th riots that happened, and the students were very upset about that. And we could have just piled through and not talked about it because we're a science program and that doesn't really fit. But it was so important to say, this was disturbing. How are you? Do you have thoughts? Do you need to get something off your head? And that allowed the students to work through it. And about a half hour after talking, they were like, okay, let's go. I'm ready to hear what science we're going to talk about today. And so again, it's just really important that we trust the youth, that we listen to their feedback, and that we as adults show them that we can be malleable and change it up when needed. So this is the last quote I'll leave you at. This is from one of the students in Houston, one of our amazing programs. And so teaching youth, these are the future of all that bird conservation that we've been talking about today. If we don't get them engaged now, if we don't show them there's a positive path forward, we're going to end up losing all the hard work that the folks on this call have been talking about.
Thank you. So up next, we have Pete Dykman with Houston Audubon.
I'm here. Let me start this up. All right, can everyone see the PowerPoint? So my name is Pete Dykman. I'm the Coastal Sanctuaries Manager for Houston Audubon, and I'm here to talk to you about our High Island Rookery Expansion and Resiliency project that we started back in 2018. So project location was at the Smith Oaks Rookery, which is in High Island at the base of the Bolivar Peninsula on the eastern edge of Galveston Bay, where we already have an existing rookery island. The High Island Rookery has been active since 1995, a year after it was acquired by Houston Audubon. So as soon as we put protections and limited prohibited hunting, etc., the birds came and used the islands to nest. So 8 annual nesters: neotropic cormorants, great egrets, snowy egrets, little blue herons, tricolored herons, cattle egrets, black-crowned night herons, and roseate spoonbills. Those are the regulars. We also get yellow-crowned night herons and hingas, etc. So the big season our big tourist season starts in February. That's when the great egrets start displaying out on the island, and that goes, it says May, but you can still see birds out there all the way through July, nesting on the island. And year round, birds will fly in at sunset to roost for the evening and get the protection provided by our guard gators. So Smith Oaks is home to a stable population of American alligators that are also essential to the success of the High Island Rookery. So they help dissuade some would-be predators like raccoons, skunks, and possums from swimming across the water and getting onto the island. So general management practices, we regularly monitor and survey. We survey the nesting species for the Texas Colonial Waterbird Survey, which is a 2-week window in May. And then we do weekly roosting counts, counting all the birds that fly in at sunset. We also provide nesting structures. Storms have knocked down trees. We'll do various plantings, treat fire ants, and then managing the water level is key, because when the water level is low enough, the alligators cannot keep up their patrols around the islands, and we start getting mammalian predators that we'll have to go out there and remove. So we actually purchased water way back in the drought in 2011, not that long ago. And then we've also had to pump towards the tail end of the drought. We had to pump about 3.5 million gallons of water from Smith Pond, which is directly adjacent to Clay Bottom Pond, up into Clay Bottom. So this is a aerial photo from 1969, which shows water levels at their kind of peak in Clay Bottom. So Clay Bottom is the island on the right. Smith Pond is the pond on the right. Smith Pond is the one on the left. Clay Bottom is completely surrounded by a levee, so there is no freshwater inflow except for what falls inside the levee system from rain events. So in 2011, you can see Clay Bottom Pond had portions of it completely dried up. There was still a little bit of water, but that western section of the island that is close to the levee system and our trails and observation platforms was completely dry, and predators could easily walk across it, which is why we had to purchase water. So at Smith Pond, it also dried up, so we didn't have that reservoir of water that we could pump from. So this picture just shows the vegetation on solid ground across Clay Bottom Pond, and how easy it would be for a raccoon to go over there and pick eggs, spend the night picking eggs out of nests. So we came up with this plan thanks to a grant from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. And we worked in partnership with Ducks Unlimited to help us better manage the water levels. So this map on the right side of your screen, the red areas would be excavation areas and the green areas would be deposition areas. So the plan was to place a control structure along a drainage ditch, which is that yellow line that otherwise dumps most of the rain and drains the north side of High Island and dumps it out directly into the marsh. So we wanted a way to harvest that and direct it into Clay Bottom Pond, and as well add an additional acre of nesting habitat, both in Smith Pond, where there's never been an island, and at an additional island in Clay Bottom Pond. So project implementation, there's a bunch of photos I'm going to share here. So January 2018, we started on the water conveyance ditch across our prairie at Smith Oaks. We also started the construction of the additional island in Smith Pond, in Clay Bottom Pond. And we're also planning to dredge the channels in front of the island, between the island and the observation platforms, so that during those periods of those low water periods, it would still be deep enough to hold water and alligators could still keep up their patrols around the island. So we placed that material at the foot of the existing island. This is a photo showing the levee that was cut to install culverts to direct the water into Clay Bottom Pond. This is the completed levee reconstructed with culverts and the end of the water conveyance ditch. And so the island in Clay Bottom Pond was complete. So we started installing artificial nesting structures. And in all, when we were finished, we installed 250 square feet worth of artificial nesting platforms. This is an 8x10 flat surface, which if you visited the Rookery this year, you saw about 5 or 6 pairs of great egrets on it. This is the island in Smith Pond. Smith Pond water levels are easier to manage. It has overflows, so you can't get too much water in it. So this is a volunteer work day we had in High Island, where volunteers were placing trees donated from Trees for Houston. Thank you, Trees for Houston, and to establish vegetation and eventually become nesting structure. So this is May of 2018. So this is 5 months after project start. Water control structures are in, culverts are in, and the ground is dry. So we hadn't received rain up to this point. So this is the water conveyance ditch in its completed form. And no birds nested on Smith Pond that first year, but we did start to see some volunteer vegetation. So here's a little small black willow sapling that is getting started. And by the end of that first growing season, this is the island in Clay Bottom Pond. This is Sesbania rattlebox, which we have dubbed this island Rattlebox Island because of this. It took over, and we quickly found out that the neotropic cormorants and tricolored herons love Sesbania. So we started our work days again in High Island and started installing a different form of bird nesting structures. So these are after that, from May to November, those black willow volunteers went from about 6 inches to about 6 feet. We also started in January of that second year to attract nesting birds to the island by these spray painted pink yard flamingos. It did not work. After that second growing season, you can see the black willow, and there's some Sesbania over there on the left, had just completely taken off. So those artificial nesting structures stand at about 7 foot tall. we had black willow volunteers out of 2 growing seasons that are now at 15 feet tall. The whole perimeter of the island is now surrounded by cattail, so we've dubbed this island Cattail Island. You can see our guard gator there in the bottom of the photo, maintaining his patrols. So the island was completely, pretty well established with vegetation, but still no birds were nesting on it. Neotropic cormorants were using the island and the Sesbania in Clay Bottom Pond. Being able to manage those high water levels, we were able to flood this adjacent forest, which is mostly black willow and bald cypress, which greatly increased our area of nesting habitat. So about 4.5 acres in total, we added for the birds. So we started keeping track of the water levels. You can see from project start, we didn't get a lot of rain and it dropped, and we had a pretty significant rain event. And then the red line is Smith Pond. You can see it stays fairly steady. It does have some freshwater inflow, so we're not too concerned about it. It's the levee ringed clay bottom pond that we're hoping that we want to better manage the water levels. So you actually see a very strong drop after January 2020. The water was a little bit too high. So it was actually covering portions of the existing Rookery Island. So we siphoned with 4-inch PVC pipe water from Clay Bottom Pond into Smith Pond, and it drained off of Smith Pond. One was not enough, so we had to use 3. And the big news this year, after 3 years, when the project was completed, we finally have birds nesting in Smith Pond. So this is a view of Cattail Island from our Catherine McGovern canopy walkway. This is a UAV photo that I took back in June that shows all the mostly cattle egrets on this island, but there are snowies and great egrets using it, tricolors, etc. And no one decided to use my hard-earned artificial nesting platform yet. I look forward to that day. And it's a beautiful view. You should come out and see it. So by the numbers, you can see the project completion date. So you can see we've had a fairly steady increase over those first 3 years with having that flooded forest adjacent to Rattlebox Island. And then this year, having all the birds nesting on Smith Pond. Saw a little bit of an increase. I'm not going to go through every single species, but I have picked out a couple of them. So tricolored heron nests were quite interesting. You see the numbers, the regular numbers of nesting pairs prior to the project, 10 years prior to the project were fairly low. And in 2018, they were still pretty low, but that was the first growing season where there really wasn't anything on the island in that April to May 2018 timeframe. But the second year, when that Sesbania grew up and that flooded forest adjacent to Rattlebox was utilized, we saw a pretty dramatic increase from year to year. It dropped a little bit this year, but still looks good. Cattle egrets were another one that were really kind of exploded. Again, you see real low numbers. And then this year we saw more cattle egret nests than we have since we started monitoring. So this is a Texas Colonial Waterbird survey data. And then everyone likes roseate spoonbills, so I threw this one in there just for heck of it. So, average about 106 across this time frame. We saw 83 pairs this year, so that's not too bad. So in summary, we did what we wanted to do. We've been able to manage the water levels. We've seen regular alligator patrols. We still go out onto the islands prior to the breeding season every year, and we look for tracks just in case something did swim out there. Our new islands have plenty of nesting habitat now, in addition to the artificial structures that we installed. And, you know, we're seeing more birds. And now this year was the first year in Smith Pond. It's going to grow up. You know, we might get some more adventurous birds to come nest in Smith Pond and open up some capacity for other birds in Clay Bottom. Only time will tell. So thank you. Thanks to Ducks Unlimited at NIFWIF. Our Houston Audubon volunteers been super helpful, helping us get, you know, plants in the ground and structures installed. And that's all I got.
Thank you. So again, we have Anna going for Richard Gibbons, who couldn't make it today.
Yep. Sorry, you have to hear me talk more, everyone. I'm going to run through this real quick so we can kind of get closer to our schedule. But we've already kind of covered the lead up slides to Lights Out Texas. So here's an overview of Lights Out Texas and our current efforts. All right, so a lot of the partners who helped start Lights Out Texas are actually here. Colorado State University, we heard Annika's wonderful presentation. I know Kyle's here as well. And so we partnered in 2020 with the Cornell Lab of Ornithology and this group of organizations to take what we had, which was a small grassroots effort called Lights Out for Birds, and turn it into the Lights Out Texas program that we have today. There's also all these other partners who are now involved supporting the effort. It is not just a Houston effort anymore. Yvette kind of covered this. A lot of cities are doing amazing work related to the Lights Out program. And so Yvette went through this. Our region is super important for birds, especially migratory birds. We have billions of birds that fly through every year, which is a crazy thing to think about. In Texas alone, I think there's like 1 billion birds that migrate, and we get them in the spring and the fall. And so the Houston area is what's known, and this is taken from Cornell Labs Living Bird magazine. They call our area a fire escape. So Yvette kind of went into this, but when these small birds or larger birds are migrating from South America, or Central America, they cross over the Gulf of Mexico, and we are their first stop, that first fire escape if there is weather, if they didn't have enough fuel supply for their journey. And so they need a safe place to come and rest and recoup and continue on their journey north or south. And so what used to be, Houston used to be primarily prairie with riparian corridors. The sad thing about prairie is that it's super easy to build on. And so we have built on it. Houston, a lot of the cities in Texas are just kind of expanding outwards into all of this habitat. And so when birds used to kind of land in these safe habitat areas, they're now facing this, city skylines, and city skylines are pretty dangerous. So this is an amazing graphic from Cornell. It shows you about how many birds die related to collisions with these different features of a city. So residences, you can see is a high one, 253 million birds. And then all the way over, you can see those tall buildings with 340 million birds. The interesting thing to note here too is that wind turbines, which always get a lot of media attention, everybody gets revved up about wind turbines, really in comparison, don't kill quite as many birds as some of these other regular structures we see in our cities. And a lot of you will probably know this, but Houston ranked #2 of the 125 largest US cities as for light pollution exposure risks to nocturnal migrants. Dallas is #3. I think the only city that beat us was Chicago. And you can see just how bright we really are. And so collision prevention, preventing these birds, our migratory birds and our resident birds from hitting windows can really be broken down into 2 categories. And there are 2 separate problems with this, but they're also kind of the same problem. And so daytime collisions and nighttime collisions. And daytime collisions are the ones that those residents, that number on that graphic of the residences, 258, I think, million birds, that is a lot of daytime collisions. These are low windows. It's a lot of issue related to reflection, to large, aesthetically pleasing windows to humans, and then plants, indoor plants, and things like that all contribute to birds are not able to see glass. And so it just looks like a clear rite of passage through a building, and they end up colliding with the glass during the day. So again, windows are worse than invisible to birds because they do reflect foliage, the sky, things like that. And it's almost like welcoming the birds to pass through your house. So daytime collisions are somewhat preventable based on architecture. When we've all seen the slides about window decals, films, closing your blinds, placing feeders far enough or close enough to a window to where you don't encourage those kinds of quick movements by birds. It's really all about, like, there are bird-friendly architectural guidelines for new buildings to try and prevent this issue of welcoming birds to just fly through your windows. But we're here kind of to talk more about the nighttime collisions, which is, again, a similar but separate issue. So most North American bird species are migratory. And of those, the majority of these species migrate at night. So nearly 2 billion birds migrate through Texas each year. But the light from our cities, the sky glow that we emit, can have this attraction and disorientation effect on birds. And so this light pollution thing can then concentrate migrant birds in a city because it really does attract. We don't know a ton about exactly why this happens or all of the inner workings, but there is a lot of work being done across the cities with these partners, the Lights Out Texas partners, to start to do collision monitoring to better understand what is going on and how we can change to prevent that. And so one of the things we've been working with the folks at Cornell and Kyle Horton's lab at Colorado State is using their birdcast technology to inform when we should really push people to turn out their lights. I really appreciated Annika's presentation about how they figured out when peak migration is, because we're using those dates to tell buildings downtown Houston, turn out your lights from this date to this date in the spring and this date to this date in the fall. It's typically like a 2 or 3 week period in the spring and a longer period in the fall. And a lot of buildings will do that. Even more buildings are eager to agree to just turn their lights out when there is high predicted migration. So if we give people this tiered option in the hopes that the periods of time where we have the most likelihood of migration, we will have the best participation in people turning out those lights and dimming that sky glow that we see across Houston. So this program all started in Houston in 2017. Yvette mentioned there was a recent mass collision event in New York. We had a mass collision event in Galveston in 2017, where about 400 songbirds all collided with one building. And that building wanted to know, hey, what do I do to make this never happen again? And so that's where this program was born, the Lights Out Action Alerts, and then eventually all of these partners coming together to use this migration prediction technology to inform the conservation actions across these cities. Again, the partners are really the key here. We're a very much grassroots effort, and this has exploded in the last 2 years thanks to all of the partner work. We're super excited that the city of Houston did Lights Out Action Alerts this past spring. We're hoping they'll do it again this upcoming spring. And we have collision monitoring ongoing in spring and fall across the state of Texas to better understand what is going on, what weather patterns impact bird collisions, if it's certain times of day, things like that. So hopefully those results can help us make this program even stronger. And this is one of those graphics that shows this is the 19 days that this is from Kyle Horton, that most birds are likely to be passing through our region. So I'm trying to be quick. You here, any Bird City, Texas, which is a really cool crossover, can sign up to receive Lights Out Action Alerts to their email when the high intensity migration is predicted. So you can go to alert.birdcast.info and sign up for Lights Out Action Alerts, or you can follow Houston Audubon. We always post it on our social media when there is high predicted migration. That's the QR code if you wanted to scan it real quick. I can also put the link in the chat. So birds are migrating now, tonight in Houston and across most of the Central Flyway. Birds are migrating. Keep your lights out if you are at home, or if you work in an office building, turn all the lights out you can. We are in peak fall migration right now. And again, it's high predicted migration tonight. So we're going to be seeing a lot of birds, and we are doing collision monitoring in the morning to hopefully use any bird deaths to help protect birds in the future. So thank you. I'm going to pass it off to Kristen Vale with American Bird Conservancy so we can get to our question time. All to you, Kristen. You're muted. There you
Yeah,
go.
I just realized that. All right. Let's finish this party. All right. Have I started sharing my screen yet? I think so.
Yes. Looks
Okay.
good.
Thank you. All right, so I'm going to talk about a partnership program that that American Bird Conservancy, who I work for, is partnered with Houston Audubon with since 2012. It's a Texas shorebird and seabird stewardship program. And this program that we're partnered with Houston Audubon, specifically, the goal is to stabilize or increase populations of imperiled beach nesting bird species through our three-prong approach, which is protection, monitoring, and outreach. So we physically protect the nesting habitat. We monitor the birds that are using that habitat to see how they respond to their protections. We monitor individual nests to see if they're hatching, and if they are hatching, or if they're not hatching, why? Is it human related or is it natural related? We're documenting to see how many chicks fledge from each of these sites. And we actually ban the birds. You see, we're holding a Wilson's plover here with a coded band. So we track individual birds. We can follow them to see how many chicks they have. And then the last prong is outreach. And so a lot of people that visit the beach do not realize that birds lay their eggs in the sand. So our goal is to educate as many people before they even hit the sand that birds nest there, and to watch out for them. And then we also talk to people that are on the beach. So I'm going to touch on a little bit of these three moving forward. So we have 4 target beach nesting bird species that we monitor: black skimmer, least tern, snowy plover, and Wilson's plover. They all have declining or low populations. They all have some sort of conservation status. The black skimmer in Texas generally do not nest on beaches. They prefer the bayside colonial islands. But when one of those islands fail, if there's a high tide or something, they occasionally do move to the beach. But generally, we have the 3 species, the least terns and the plovers, that we generally monitor. So the beach nesting bird habitat, this is a photo of East Beach in Galveston. This is one of our monitoring sites. They like sparse, open, sandy area. They like beaches, and they like dunes that have short, sparse vegetation. They like open sand. So this is a kind of to show you what they like. And then they also like beach fronts. The front of the dunes, this is the 4 dunes at Bolivar Flat Shorebird Sanctuary, which is a Houston Audubon property. And here is actually, in the red box, is a Wilson's plover that is actually incubating a nest. So I'm going to show you, do a little bit of a visual to show you some of the reasons why we work so hard to protect these beach nesting birds. They're incredibly camouflaged with their environment. They do this to hide from predators. They have many natural predators, so they camouflage with their environment. You can see another Wilson's plover incubating its nest. This is also at Bolivar Flats. The eggs eggs just look like seashells, and the chicks are real camouflage as well to be able to hide from predators. So this is a snowy plover in the red box incubating its nest. It's really out in the open, but again, completely camouflaged. And then the least tern, they're the most vulnerable of all. They love just open sand, and they also love to nest right in the high tide line too. So they're quick nesters. I call them sloppy nesters. They'll just lay their eggs wherever they can. They just want to hurry up and nest. So this is a little quiz I like to show a lot of people. Can you find the least tern chick in this photo? Give you a second to kind of look at it. And since we're short on time, I'll give you the answer. there is this least turn chick. It's a few days old. It is right in the open sand at Bolivar Flats Beach. And this one's kind of near the high tide line where a lot of people walk. So this chick is incredibly vulnerable. So I mentioned there's many like natural threats, and honestly, there's a lot of avian threats to these beach nesting birds. Coyotes are a big threat, but as well as many other birds, and ghost crabs are threats to them as well. But we've in our program are focusing on the human threats. So humans, beachgoers, on the left photo is a least turn nest with 2 chicks and 1 egg that's about to hatch. Those were almost crushed by somebody walking in the nesting area. There's vehicles, plenty that are driving on the dunes. And the top right photo is of a least turn nest that was in between 2 tire tracks. Unfortunately, this nest did eventually get run over by a vehicle, and we try to deal with unleashed dogs just running through these nesting areas. So habitat protection is our best way and most successful way of protecting these birds. This is direct conservation in action. It's fairly simple, but it's so effective. And the key is we have to be persistent. And so we put up these yellow signs on the left. You can kind of see we have English and Spanish. We have yellow signs. We actually fence the nesting area as well. We have baler twine and some orange flagging tape that actually fences off this nesting area. You can see the black skimmer pair in the background on the left photo. So those, we actually put up physical barriers on our monitoring sites. And then we have some other signs here and there that we put up at our beaches. So in Texas, we're not able to close off the entire beach. There's the Open Beaches Act. So all beaches are open to the public. And like I mentioned, least turns love to nest outside in the, near the swash zone, which is where we cannot, always protect. So we put the signs up that say, help keep our beach nesting birds safe. Please walk in the wet sand. So I encourage you when you're on the beach to walk in the wet sand. You're less likely to step on a nest or a chick that's hiding in the seaweed. So here's some photos to show you how these protections or fencing is actually working. The left photo shows a bunch of beachgoers' footprints in the sand, and then you see the fencing, and then behind the fencing, there's 0 footprints. So this is actually, this simple fencing is actually really effective of keeping people out. And on the right photos, we have some Wilson's plover chicks and some least turn chicks that are inside the fencing that are, not disturbed, and they're feeding and they're acting normal, which is great. So these protections have been really helpful. We have to be consistent with putting up the fencing. We have to constantly fix it. Sometimes people cut the line. Sometimes the coyotes cut the line. So we have to be out there regularly and show people that we are there monitoring it. But these are incredibly effective. And one other effective way we've been able to help protect the birds is actually implement a beach management practice guideline for large events at East Beach. So the left photo is of East Beach. In the background, you can see the dunes, you can see the nesting area. But in front of that, you can see a concert being set up in the parking lot at East Beach. This parking lot can fit over 5,000 vehicles. So you have people parking directly to this nesting area. So there is conflict, but we're there to kind of mitigate, any of those conflicts. And so they asked the Galveston Park Board of Trustees, who manages the Galveston beaches, asked us to work with, to create this document so that they can better manage these large events that does not harm the nesting birds. So they want to help, and we were there to help them. So this document is active now. It was voted and improved on this year. And this document actually helped stop a kite festival that was there scheduled for June or July this year. That was supposed to be right next to the nesting area. And kites are very disturbing to the birds when they're nesting. So this has been a successful tool so far. Just a little bit of some of the monitoring that we do. You've got Bolivar Flat Shorebird Sanctuary on the top and East Beach and Galveston on the bottom. And some of our monitoring that we've done, we saw that there were fewer Wilson's plover breeding pairs through the years at Bolivar Flats, and the number of breeding pairs were increasing in Galveston. So they basically swapped. So they were leaving this protected area and move into a more human use area. but the habitats were changing. And but we saw that, that the Wilson's plovers were comfortable coming to East Beach. That was, such a high use area. And we knew we had a lot of the birds were banded. So we were able to see that they were moving back and forth between Bottle River Flats and East Beach once the habitat was appropriate. So fortunately, both of these areas are protected. So, unfortunately gives these birds different sites to use whenever, one habitat, 1 year might not be good versus the other. So we had some good results through our work. And some other great information that we've learned is we've been able to get some information about where the Wilson's plovers are spending their winters. They do not spend the winters in Texas. They migrate south. And we've gotten some information, some resites of our birds being seen in El Salvador, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, and Panama. And a lot of them like to spend the winters on salt farms where they actually make salt. And they are there in big roost. And, there's a lot of disturbances in the winter grounds. There's a lot of habitat loss. So these birds are having to deal with threats year round. So there's some great people in Central and South America working with the salt farmers to help protect the habitat as well. So lastly, outreach is a huge part of our job. On busy holidays and weekends, we're out at those big beaches to educate beachgoers, to let them know to stay out of the nesting areas, but also inform them, about them. Again, not a lot of people know that birds lay their eggs in the sand. So we're there to talk to them, show them pictures, show them a scope of a bird sitting on the nest. And we've had some wonderful results, and we just hope the program continues, which it is. So here's my contact information if you have any questions. So I appreciate Houston Audubon for allowing us to talk tonight.
Thanks, Kristen.
Thank you. Before we get to the questions, I just would like to thank everyone who attended today, all of the presenters. I hope that you guys will come again in the future.